So welcome everybody. Welcome to our ECOP Wednesday webinar of June. My name, for those that doesn't know who I am, I'm one of the current Young Ambassador of the European Marine Board, and today I will be the host of the session. And for those that doesn't have attend one of these webinar, I will explain the housekeeping rules. Firstly, please make sure your name is clearly entered for the after talk question sessions. Keep your microphone mute unless you are speaking or during some question. Raise your hand if you would like to speak. And you can also use the chat function to make comments and ask questions. Please be respectful and use appropriate language. For those that doesn't know where is the Early Career Open Professional Network, is the network of ocean professionals at the European Marine Board and was established by the Young Ambassador and the Secretariat in October 2024. And the last year was included as a part of the consortium of for emerging ocean leaders in June of the 2025. It's a great opportunity to network and meet peers across Europe and gain a voice at European Marine Board level. And we do these kind of activities like the ECOP Wednesday event series and other kind of activities where we promote out members of the Early Careers and Professional Network. Today I have the pleasure to present Gro Slotsvik that is going to talk about the topic in transformative approaches to ocean protection, restoration, and governance. Thank you to Matt, Gro, to be here and to participate in this initiative. And when you want to talk about your topic, you can start. Thank you.
Thank you. And as per usual, Zoom does not want to let me share just yet. So I think someone else is
Let me see it.
sharing technically.
Okay, yeah. Now you can do it, I think. It's ready.
So now we are good. And let's double check. Does that work?
All work. Yeah.
Fantastic. So thank you very much for the introduction. And yes, I'm Gro Slotsvik. I am leader for the Nature Impact team at Grid Arendal, which is a Norwegian non-profit. And I will be talking about transformative change, the role that it can play and how practically all of us in the room today can be part of contributing to transformative change. And just to be completely open, I was never an early career ocean professional myself. I have a social sciences background. I've been working for the past 15 plus now years on global challenges, but we're working mainly in the international development sector, humanitarian sector, and on climate, then linked to coastal ecosystems and coastal communities, food security, and then moved back to my native Norway and Arendal, which is where I am today. Normally very sunny, sunniest part of Norway, and today it is bucketing it down. So do let me know if there's any interference. And I thought when I moved back to Norway and to Grid that I would be working mainly with countries in the global south, with the usual kind of challenges around marine ecosystems and protection, restoration, and governance. And then when I moved back, I realized what a destructive relationship Norway and so many other countries of the global north have with ocean ecosystems and the need to address some of those underlying causes. So while I still work very much on global south challenges, I'm still also now in the global north, and how do we address those underlying issues? Which is it's fantastic for me that Grid has taken such a strong stance in terms of transformative change, which is one of the things I'll talk about today. So I know you had a talk with the amazing Dorothy Dankel from Sintef Ocean at the end of last year, if I'm correct. And she also talked about transformative change and what that means in her line of work. So I'll try to complement that, but with a bit of a dive into what transformative change is for those who haven't been able to join past talks, and then what it means in terms of grid and our work on the ocean. But the main part of today, I'd like to focus quite practically on how we can all contribute to transformative change, especially in terms of ocean work. I'll talk a little bit about my work with the UN Environment Programme on this, and how your role fits into the bigger picture. As I said, Grid Arendal, it's a not-for-profit. It's a Norwegian organisation. It was set up by the Norwegian government 37 years ago now to support the UN Environment Programme and other UN agencies on environmental questions. And this was back when I think we all believed that if policymakers and other decision makers just had the information they needed about the state of the environment, then they would make good environmental governance decisions. And a couple of decades later, I think people started realizing, funnily enough, information isn't enough to drive action. Grid started turning to storytelling as a key part of this. So still working very much in the science policy to practice interface, but really looking at how do you work with policymakers, how do you work with other decision makers, with researchers, with the public to drive the kind of equitable impact that we need. And there's been progress for Grid. For others, I think we can all agree that the progress we've seen in terms of environmental governance, and perhaps especially for the ocean, it's not happened at the scale or the pace or the depth that we need. And in terms of our work with the ocean, that is both a crisis and an opportunity. I'd say it's relatively recent that most people have realized the impact of human activities on ocean ecosystems. But also there's this dawning realization that we rely so much on a healthy ocean for our economy, for climate, climate stabilization, health and well-being, cultures. And that means there is this opportunity to embed transformative change into ocean governance in a way that hasn't really been there before. For Grid, this means changing a little bit how we work. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Grid, we work a lot at the global level with different UN agencies on climate, nature, and pollution. We also work with regional organizations like the Regional Seas Programme specifically for the marine environment. We work a lot at the national level, so directly with governments, and those tend to be kind of the UNEP priority countries. Work a lot in Senegal and Indonesia and Kenya, small island developing states. We've just set up our office in Senegal, West Africa office. And basically we focus on the topics that are important to those countries. So it could be combating illegal fisheries, it could be implementing inclusive, sustainable blue economy policies, it could be high integrity ocean finance, improving marine protected area governance. We basically listen to their priorities and then we build the partnerships needed to help them implement what they need. occasionally we work directly with local communities, and it's often on things like improving MPA governance, for instance. So it's a snapshot of what we do, and then I'm happy to talk about any specifics in the question section. But I figured the main thing that you are here for is on the transformative change. And for GRID, this is a case of the planet facing this convergence of crises. So it's not isolated problems. There are systemic issues and there are deeper systemic imbalances driving the problems that we see, meaning that, restoration, regeneration, systemic change are essential, are basically allowing environmental ecosystems to heal themselves. And for us, because transformative change, it spoke to us as an organization, this idea of fundamental systemic shift in views and structures and practices. It means we also change how we work. So we've worked a lot with a company called Sea Change, which will also be familiar to Dorothy. So if some of the language sounds very familiar, it's because we've joined the same program with Sea Change, which I would highly recommend, and I'll talk a bit about that at the end. So the design that we use is this 3 spheres design, where when we design our projects and we design our interventions, we make sure that they target the personal sphere, so the human element, our values, our beliefs, worldviews. We also look at the political sphere, so how do we shift systems and structures that have created problems in the first place, or basically maintaining those problems, making it very hard or sometimes impossible even to find solutions and to scale solutions that last. And then finally, the practical sphere. This is one that will be familiar to most of us because it's where most of us spend our time. So this is the kind of, we have a technical problem, let's find a technical solution. And this sphere is very important, but it's not enough on its own. And that's where the transformative change approach comes in. And for GRID and our work on the ocean, it means that we target both immediate problems and the root causes. So we, as I said, we look at, for instance, illegal fisheries. We look at loss of habitats, overfishing, but then we also look at what are the drivers behind those. Working across silos, science policy practice, but also science silos within communities. A big part of this is around promoting new narratives. So those of us who have grown up with what is the current kind of dominant narrative around nature and humans being separate to nature in some way, nature being this endless resource that we should try to extract as much as possible from for endless growth. I mean, it's very obvious that we are fundamentally animals, that we are part of these ecosystems, that we are reliant on them, and we can't use them endlessly. I'd say it's obvious. As human societies, we are still not necessarily acting that way. But the idea is that we can and will change that. And finally, everything is interconnected. So where we have traditionally come at problems from, for instance, a very sort of strict delineation between teams, we're now actually working very much across the organization. So, for instance, one of the projects we're just in the process of closing out now is working with the government of the Comoros Islands. And it's on basically helping them create this inclusive, sustainable blue economy policy, which is obviously very important for small island developing states or big ocean states, when so much of your economy relies on the ocean. And that is for instance, taking a very inclusive approach of working with communities on the 3 main islands, making sure that people feel heard, that it's a case of coming in. I mean, this is through a project that's already been set up by the UN Environment Programme and FAO, the SIDS Restoration Flagship, which is under the UN Decade of Restoration. And basically making sure that we come in and we listen. We listen to different voices, different locations, and then bring everyone together to shape this new policy together. Again, I'm very happy to talk specific if anyone wants to hear more about specific projects, but I would really like to spend most of our time talking about how early career Asian professionals and everyone else can contribute to transformative change. And I've broken this down into 5 kind of sections. First of which is about that wider structure that already exists, which might be familiar to some or perhaps even all of you through IPBES. The fact that it still starts with us, it starts with you. There's designing differently for change, and then there's working differently. So favouring process over product, which is a bit of an anomaly with many ways of kind of the usual applying for projects and how the outputs are what matter, when actually to design for transformative change and to run projects for transformative change, we look at the process, how things are run. And then finally, the hardest part, which is practicing and maintaining a practice. And as I said, so the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, it's quite the mouthful. IPBES published 3 reports actually around about the same time, and they are all worth looking at if you haven't already. But the one that we are working the most on is the 2024 Transformative Change Report. Technically, the underlying causes of biodiversity loss and determinants of transformative change and options for achieving the 2050 vision for biodiversity. Surprisingly, it just becomes the Transformative Change Report. And this report was seminal, really, in terms of how it talks not just about the problem, so what's the state of biodiversity loss, but also very explicitly talked about the underlying causes and you know, talking about our current form of capitalism, for instance, resource extraction, our relationship with nature. Like, this is, it shouldn't have been radical, but it kind of was. And the good thing about this report is also that it sets out these 5 complementary strategies to bring about transformative change, which means that we don't need to start from scratch. And I don't know how well you can read this, but the 5 strategies are to conserve and regenerate places of value to nature and people, driving systemic change in the sectors most responsible for nature's decline. So oil and gas is an obvious one, but also fisheries, agriculture. There's the 3rd, transforming economic systems for nature and equity, transforming governance systems to be integrative, inclusive, accountable, and adaptive. And then finally, shifting views and values to recognize human nature interconnectedness. And the point of all this is, as I said, there's kind of already a structure in place. So you may already be working on these strategies or contributing to these strategies without necessarily doing so deliberately or being aware of it. we had a very interesting case where we were looking at this and how it corresponds to grid strategy. And the wording is different, but the meaning is essentially the same as each of these strategies in some ways. Some we work on and some we don't really, but we work on them through partnerships. And partnerships is vital because you won't be doing any of these on your own necessarily. But finding ones that resonate with you, assuming that this approach of kind of looking at it from an analytical point of view, seeing where your work might fit in, which of these strategies fit with what you want to do, and then looking at, okay, but who do I need to work with to be part of making something happen? I'm one piece of the puzzle. So where are the other pieces that I need to make change in the area where I want to see change? Because, as I said, it does start with you, no pressure. The three spheres diagram that I showed earlier has the personal sphere on the outside for a reason. It's basically the individual sphere is the one that will help drive action, especially where we need to see courageous action from policymakers, from decision makers. It's about connecting as humans, because systems and structures, as I said, they're not something that exists in isolation. We are the systems that we are trying to shift. So we basically don't have individual responsibility to fix the world, fix the parts of the ocean that are horribly degraded at the moment, but we are fractals of change. One of the leading people in this field is Karen O'Brien. She was the co-chair of the IPBES Transformative Change report. She's also co-founder of Sea Change. And she talks a lot about this, that you matter more than you think. And that we are essentially fractals of change. So how we show up matters, because we are small on our own, but we are always part of systems. We are part of our families, we are part of our workplaces, our friendship groups, our gyms, our professional networks, and what you do and how you show up matters. It can have ramifications beyond what you know, and that's positive ramification. So there's this element of transformative change about basing your actions on universal values. So universal values is basically different from how we often talk about values, which is sort of in the sense of for instance, family values or cultural values, company values, so things that are essentially regulations in some way. There are rules that are about having this shared sense of identity or codes of conduct. Universal values is what matters to you, something you want for all people everywhere. So something you want not only for your family, say, but also for people who have wildly different ideas to you about policy, political viewpoints, worldviews. Let's see, I'm going to see how we're doing for time. Yeah, I think we have time for a quick exercise, and this is a very sped up version, and I can't see anyone, so I'm just trusting that if you're interested, you'll do it, and if not, then now is a good time to have a cup of tea or something. So this is basically a very quick exercise. Pen and paper, if you have it, go for it. Otherwise, you can use your phone, computer. And I would like you to think about a person you admire. So ideally someone who is a public figure or someone who you don't know personally, if you can. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to have a think. And if no one springs to mind, you can also choose someone you know, family member, for instance. There are ways to do this exercise properly. You can do it at length later on if nothing comes to mind now. The point of this exercise is to then think about what is it about this person, the way that they speak and the way that they act that you admire. What does that way that they speak or act say about them and how they engage with the world? So as I said, we've done this exercise, the deeper version of it with a whole of grid things that came up with different role models for different people, with things like they show that they care about fairness, they care about equity, being fair to all. They show courage. They show integrity or authenticity. They practice what they speak. They do what they commit to. Or it might be humility or kindness or contentment. So I'll give you just a tiny bit of time to think about what comes up for you when you think about this person you admire. What do their actions and the way that they speak say about them? And then the secret to all this is that what you admire in other people tends to reflect your own good qualities and your own universal values. So basically, what you admire in them is a very good pointer to what your own inner values are. I'd recommend having a look for a kind of more in-depth version of that if you can. I'll touch a little bit more in the practice section at the end. But these values are very, very important when it comes to designing for change. So as I said, a grid, we use that 3 spheres diagram, and one of the tools from Sea Change, which is around that kind of initial project design or design of initiatives. I mean, you use it through the whole process, but it's particularly useful sort of at the beginning. And these questions, I should say, these questions are my slightly adapted versions from that official worksheet, and they are ones that we used for a workshop earlier this year with the different teams that we work with across the UN Environment Programme on the ocean. And we held a workshop that was sort of 3 half days with the aim of creating a joint ambition and action plan for ocean transformation. So how do we better protect, restore, and govern ocean ecosystems? And what was very interesting with this workshop was that, of course, everyone comes with their own areas of work that they really want to see reflected in those final workshop outputs. The UN agencies, like every other place of work, is not immune to silos. It's not immune to a sense of there's scarcity of resources. And so everyone in the beginning is very keen to kind of make sure that their own area is in there in those final documents. So what we did on day 1 is to get everyone to complete this particular worksheet, but not necessarily on what they work on day to day, just any project of their choosing, anything that they are working on, would like to work on. Doesn't even necessarily have to be something real. It could be something way in the future. It could even be a personal project, although I'm not sure anyone did that. And the point of this is these questions address different parts of those three spheres. And it starts with the personal one, and there's a reason for that. It's around the universal values that you draw on to carry out this work. It's essential for when you're doing decision-making later on, when you have to make tough decisions on how you approach your project. Those are the things that will guide you. Same for the second question. It's about the universal values and principles of the project itself. So there are some things that will be, universal values regardless of what the project is. So things like equity, for instance, or integrity, or courage, or if you're working on a really difficult subject that's really heavy, because a tricky project emotionally, then maybe joy, something to counterbalance what can otherwise be a very draining space to work in. Principles are project dependent. So if you're working with a community, you might want to have co-creation as a principle. If you're working on desk research, maybe a knowledge-based project. Again, these are very, very important. There's a reason they're at the top, because value-free design gives you value-free output. And value-free output will just replicate business as usual. Whereas these things are what you use as guidelines when you look at the partnerships that you want to build, when you look at how you engage with your stakeholders, with your partners, and with your target audiences. The problem-solving sphere is next, and this one looks easy and it's not. I think most of us are used to talking about the problems we're working on in fairly abstract ways. So, for instance, I work on overfishing. So, I work on sustainable blue economy, a lack of a sustainable economy, over extraction of resources, whatever it might be. And the trick here is to describe the problem in terms of what it physically looks like. 1 or 2 points. What does overfishing actually look like? Is it some keystone species that are no longer there? Is it local communities who used to rely on fisheries no longer have an income? What does it actually look like? And then when you've succeeded, what will have visibly changed? As I said, it's surprisingly tough, especially if you're trying to keep it to a couple of sentences, a couple of bullet points each. But it's essential when you then go to the systems and structures, because if you're looking at physical problem and what the problem actually looks like once it's been solved, what the solution looks like, it will start to point you to the systems and structures that are in place that we need to address for solutions to actually last. So it's about systems and cultural norms. What we phrase these as is from the current state to the future state that you want. And it can be things like from fragmented environmental laws and regulations to coherent, synergistic, and adaptive environmental decision-making. If you work in the governance space, it could be one of the grid ones, so not just in our ocean work, but in general is from decision makers who are disempowered by the systems they operate in, to decision makers who have the capacities, tools, and strategies they need to transform systems to benefit nature and people. They don't have to be that long. It could be, from degradation of nature being business as usual to healthy and flourishing ecosystems. But basically, whatever you put, it's the current state and then the future state. And the interesting thing about this is there's two things, really. So one thing we found, both of that's that UNEP Grid workshop, but I also found in literally any setting that I've done this exercise with, it always varies a little bit, but the end result tends to be the same, which is once we talk through what everyone has put down for that fifth question, we find that we actually need to see the same shifts. So I've done this in a group where someone was working on a community garden within her local community and getting one set up, and someone else was working on democracy. So nothing to do with ocean protection and restoration whatsoever, but we realized that actually our shifts were very, very similar. And if one of us succeeded in their project, it would help the others push theirs forward too. And that's exactly what we found with the UNEP workshop. Very different projects, but actually the shifts are the same. So that's coming back to that fractals of change idea. Even if your project seems kind of isolated, provided that you're looking at that wider shift that needs to happen, you're actually contributing to the bigger whole. And answering that fifth one will also help elucidate who your allies need to be, because you won't change things in isolation. There will be a lot of responsibility to put your own shoulders, but it's also unrealistic. You need this whole partnership to make real progress. So yeah, who does it need to be? Does it need to be policymakers, other decision makers, good communicators? Is it journalists? Is it women collectives? We worked a lot with collectives of fish processors. And it just depends entirely on the context. It depends entirely on the project. But understanding what is driving the system and keeping that system from being driving the problem and keeping it from being solved long term will help you decide who you need to work with. And that brings us a little bit to the next stage, which is the process matters. We had a very interesting case in Norway recently where, for the first time, as far as I'm aware, we established no-take zones in protected areas. This is the Oslo Fjord. And for anyone familiar with Norwegian marine protected areas and kind of the relationship with ecosystems, it's very much at odds with Norway as this ocean nation. But what happened in the Oslo Fjord, because it's very, very degraded, basically the general term is the Oslo Fjord is dead. It's an exaggeration, but perhaps not by much. And it's a very busy area. It's had problems of overfishing, eutrophication, both human waste, agricultural waste. And so the decision came, and it came fairly overnight, to establish these 10-year no-take zones. So no fisheries, not professional, not sports. And in theory, it's a good thing. It's maybe something that needs to happen. I know some of the researchers who worked on the advice to government agencies for this, it was one of their scenarios. It's not one they ever thought would happen, and it happened without them really being aware in advance that this was going to be the case. So great end result in theory in terms of helping nature restore itself. Terrible in terms of relationships, because the inadvertent consequence of this is basically confirming to fishers who were left hanging, no alternative livelihoods, no real dialogue. That came much later, but only after an uproar. They were kind of cut off. That means that setting up marine protected areas in the rest of the country, which is a commitment that Norway's made in terms of the 30 by 30 agenda, that is all the more difficult when what was already kind of trenches, researchers versus policymakers versus fishers versus local communities, those trenches just get more steep, essentially. It gets harder to build trust against them, between them. So again, this is where the values come in. And it's where connecting as human beings makes a real difference. So basically being open to talking about your own connection with the ocean, your own feelings around ecosystem degradation, it allows people to kind of transcend roles and what they're meant to be in terms of their professional profiles, essentially. Most of the time, I don't know if you have the same experience, but most of the time people that I've worked with, certainly, if they're working in or on the ocean, if they live near the ocean, if they grew up near the ocean, even just went on holidays to the seaside as kids, they have this strong sense of connection with the ocean. And tapping into that, rather than entering into this, well, the research says this, or our financial predictions say that, talking as human beings can connect and allow for some of those trenches to be overcome a little bit. And there are some very important ways to talk that will also help that process. So one of those is making I statements. I said the kind of, well, research shows that anything that is kind of, I was going to say, hiding behind the facts is not necessarily what it is. That we know what the data says, we know what information says, but referring only to that allows those you're talking to go only for that. If it doesn't fit with their reality, it's easy to disregard it. If you turn it on to you, I believe that, it's my understanding that, and I commit to working on this project with you in an equitable, fair way. I mean, whatever is appropriate to a setting, but taking responsibility and being clear that this is my understanding, this is what I think, allows people to also see you and to not kind of shut down based on whether or not what underpins your ideas and underpins your viewpoints, whether that is something they agree with or not. And this seems contrary a little bit to the next point, because there's also a time for saying we, not in the sense of we all know that, blah, blah, blah. We all know that this ecosystem is degraded. We all know that we need protection and restoration. That kind of statement people can argue with. What I'm talking about is here is a sense of we're all in it together. So talking to people, not in terms of you need to do this, but we need to do this. And understanding that when people are frustrated or when they're even angry, it's generally a sign of commitment. more than it is that they're disengaged. Most of the time, frustration is a very good indication of commitment, and it's a good time to listen to people, to listen deeply to what they are trying to get across. I'm not going to jump into that final set there. I talked a little bit about allies already, and I think we are running a little bit low on time. Yeah, I'm getting a nod here. So I will leave this one up. I think you're getting the slides afterwards anyway, so you can look at these. But I would say transformative change is about practice, so not just in the sense of training, but in terms of how you work every day. I've added some suggestions for courses. I'd highly recommend this one if you can make it. It's expensive because it's learning in action, so it goes over 3 months and it's in person. But if you have the opportunity, I'm hoping to go again next year. I really loved it the first time around. This is a Sea Change course, Transformational Leadership for Sustainability, that I mentioned. Some reading if you have the time and inclination, but also free ways to connect with you, because as I said, transformative change starts with you and your connection with yourself. And I think we're exactly on time. I hope that's the case. In which case, if you have any questions, please go for it.